today finds you all well. It gives me great honour to be sitting here with Father Stan Mellett, and on behalf of the Ballyfermot Heritage Group, I would like to thank you first and foremost to take the time out of your day to be with us here. So, Father Stan, you're very welcome.
Thanks very much. I'm very happy to have this opportunity to say some words, because, as you know, I'm shortly leaving Ballyfermot, and because of that, to get this opportunity to share some thoughts with you is a privilege.
Could you tell us a little bit about yourself, Father Stan?
About myself, I'm going to be at my next birthday. It's this year. Is 2021. I was born in 1931. So the result is that this year, during this year, I celebrate my 90th birthday. I don't feel anything like that. In fact, I think we're always young in our heads. The spirit is always young. The body begins to sort of let us down. So I can feel right enough that I'm going slower and that I haven't the same amount of energy that I used to have. So I have reasonable health, and I want to give thanks for that. So, how did I begin my life? Well, my life began in a place called Kilfenora in County Clare. It was a village, and that's all it is even to this day. There's a Burren Centre there, which didn't exist in mine. In fact, there was very little. It was a time of great poverty and great simplicity. So we all went to the same school. The boys and the girls went to the same school. And I was blessed to have a very good primary school teacher who did some things that weren't done at the time. He did a bit of, Olis Arnaudur, which means nature study. And he had a little lab where we could do some experiments. He also set up little teams with a little league in the very limited way that we had. I think there were two things on the wall. There was a map of Ireland and a map of the world. It's very, very simple. But we had a good teacher, and he gave us a sort of an interest in life, and I'm always grateful for that. And I did thank him afterwards. So in the family, I'm the fifth of 10 children, and all still alive to this day, thanks be to God. One has died, the eldest, Mark, at the age of 90. He died 5 years ago. So, I have sisters who are in their 90s, I have a brother who's in the 90s, and so on. We go down to the very end, who is 75. My brother Eamon is the youngest, and I'm his godfather. I was called out of the college in Ennis, where I was a boarder. The president came in and called me out of the class, and of course I shivered and terrified. Had I done something wrong? He says, "You have a new brother, and they want you to go out to do Godfather." And that's the only one of us who was born in the hospital, because my mother was older at the time. We were all born at home with the midwife and the doctor. My mother gave birth upstairs, and the midwife and the doctor gave my father and mother, fine, sturdy, healthy children. I don't know how people managed in those times. They had no prenatal exercises and no prenatal medical care. But they were wonderful times. Of course there were mistakes, and I'm sure some people would have suffered unnecessarily. Maybe babies were lost, I just don't know. But I would say that we owe a lot of debt to all those people who, I'd say for very little remuneration, served the villages and the district hospital, the district doctor who came around from time to time to look after our health. So that's me at home, and I went to school as a boarder in St. Flannan's, and my second year there, we had a retreat from a Redemptorist, and he was full of enthusiasm about a new mission that the Redemptorists had started in India. And I'm a little boy. I'm only maybe I'm in my 13 or 14 years of age, and my imagination is fired. I want to be a Redemptorist. I want to go out on this mission, and I want to convert all the Indians. In the event when I did go out, needless to say, my impact was minimal. infinitesimal small. Anyway, after that I transferred from Ennis, which was St. Flannan's College, to Limerick, which was the Redemptorist junior rate. And I had a stroke of luck. I don't know whether it was good or not. I had done the inter in Flannan's in 2 years, not because I was anyway brainy, but they did it twice, so that a lot of students would get scholarships, and you'd be a good name to the college. But they didn't know anything about that in Limerick, so they said, "Oh, you've done the inter, so go into the leaving classes." So I did my secondary education in 4 years. So I was always a little bit younger than the people who were in the classes with me. So what happened then? I decided that I would not go on to be a Redemptorist in my last year. I had, I suppose, thought about it, and my best friend from the year before did not continue, so that had an influence on me. But God has His own way of shaking you up. Another Redemptorist gave us a retreat just before we did the leaving. I'd already told the president of the college that I would not go ahead, and he said, "That's fine if that's your decision." But this Redemptorist started talking about those who had a vocation and didn't follow their vocation. And he said, I met some of them afterwards. They made a mess of their lives on the scrap heap of humanity, and God alone what will happen to their immortal soul. I'm terrified looking up to this, And I said, oh my God, if I don't go to the novitiate, I'll go to hell. So not the best motive, but I think that's what God does. God catches you maybe for very imperfect motives, gets you by the scruff of the neck, and then you have plenty of time afterwards, to purify your motives and to be sure. In fact, it took years and years before I was ordained a priest. I had a year in the novitiate. I went to the university and did a degree. Always a pass. I never got an honours degree in any exam I ever did. I got pass material. So that's, more or less the background and how I came to be a Redemptorist in the first place. We did a seminary, and then in the middle of my seminary years, we weren't asked to volunteer, but we were asked would we have any objection to going to India. The idea was that our new mission in India was in its infancy, and some Indians were joining the Redemptorists, and they wanted Irish students to go and live with the Indian students in terms of perfect equality. And so at that point, altogether a total of 17 went as students and were ordained out in India. So I was in a group of 6 students who went out, and I was already well into my seminary training, and had 2 years to go to ordination. So the ordination came in 1957 on the 15th of June. Of course, nobody from the family. And the morning of my ordination, we're all getting ready in the sacristy and dressing up and waiting for the bishop to come. And the superior, the president, he taps me on the shoulder to say, there's a telegram from Kilfenora to say they're all with you in spirit. Well, of course, the tears began to flow. Honest, couldn't stop. And it was, the big day had come, and it was also a big day for my parents, but they weren't there. I learned afterwards that what they did is they all went to Mass in the village. And my mother, because she was very sort of creative, they had a big celebration dinner. It was like Hamlet without the prince.
Yes.
So anyway, but when the ceremony started, and the bishop did eventually come, he was a bit late, and the ceremony started, I had to so concentrate that the tears dried up. And that was it. When it was all over, there were 2 Indians, there were 2 Filipinos, and 2 Irish. There were 6 of us on that day. So the Indians, of course, went back home to their family, into their parish, for their first Mass. But the Filipinos, the 2 Filipinos and ourselves, all we did was, I think we went down to a park, and went to a coffee shop and had it, I give them some little bit of leeway, but I mean, it's just like another day. But the ones who really missed it, of course, were my parents and my brothers and my sisters. They didn't have that big day. In India, I worked in Indian language, or rather I should say I tried to work on it. There's a southern Indian state called Tamil Nadu. It used to be called the Madras state when I was there first. The capital was Madras city. It's now called Chennai because they've gone, very nationalist and using Indian names and that. Each state in India has its own language, and it has its own media, television, papers and all that, and it's a different script. It's a bit like Chinese script. It's like a page of decorations. So it took a while to sort of get that. In fact, I had one thing in my favour. I'm a bit of a mimic, and I can, I suppose, pronounce well. So I spoke actually like a native, but I didn't have the language. All the time in India, which was a total of, out on Ash Wednesday 1955, we left from Shannon Airport by Constellation. We were being rushed out because there was a rumour in India that they weren't going to allow in any more foreign missioners. So they rushed us out. And on the Ash Wednesday 1955, we headed off from Shannon Airport, and there were no jets at the time. Constellation plane TWA, and they were delighted to have us. They made sure we'd fish because it was on the menu, because it was Ash Wednesday. And so we stopped in Zurich, we stopped in Rome, we stopped in Athens, we stopped in, it was up and down. They couldn't do a long journey. The longest hop was from Cairo to Bombay. And while we had left Shannon, freezing cold, in our big black thing, we came into Bombay and it was like going into an oven. It was different climate altogether. So that was the beginning of it. And my big first impression of India was people everywhere. You look up the street, you'd wonder what's going on. Nothing is going on. They're just going about their business. Car comes on the street, they just get out of the way to let the car pass. India has advanced now a good bit from those years. But it was a huge experience, and I was, terrified of all the stories that I'd be bitten by a snake and that I'd be robbed. You see, all these things. I remember the first time we were so tired. We were put up in a school because we had to go from Bombay down to Bangalore. That's where the seminary was. So we had to stop over in Bombay, and we had a parish there. Our redemptors were there already, but they put us up in a school. And I remember any little worldly goods that I had, like a watch and so on, I put them all under the pillow so that I'd sleep with them. And we had a net because of the mosquitoes. So I was out for the count. And in the morning when I was called, somebody put in a hand and, to clutch my shoulder. I nearly jumped through the roof. I said, it's either a snake or a robber. And of course it was neither. I came back from India. I came back from India in 1963, and in fact one little thing in the family was the one day in the whole history of the family when we were all together, my father, my mother and the 10 children, for the simple reason that before the last was born, that was Eamon, my eldest sister had joined the convent and they weren't allowed to come home, except they went on their holidays. My brother was in America, but he'd come home. And what we did was, we had the one that was in the convent was in holidays in a school in Spiddle. So we offered to drive her back to the convent. She had to be back at the convent at 8 o'clock at night before the doors were closed. So we got her, some of the other nuns wanted to come with her, but we used all sorts of, I suppose, telling lies and fibs to say we'd have to, there wouldn't be room for anybody else. So what we did is we brought her in home. There was another sister, a nun, and she was home, but she had no trouble getting it. And we had, I think, a mass in the house or some sort of a blessing and a meal, and had to get her off so that she'd be in the car. But that was the one day, because after she joined, we couldn't all go to the convent together to see her. And so that was the one opportunity, because the next time I came home, my mother had died. So that means the family had beginning to break up. But in 1963, I was home, and I was new time, first time a priest in Ireland. It was all very raw. And it was a very different Ireland. I mean, everything was still going strong, like the practice of the religion, the big confraternity in Limerick, all that was thriving at the time. In fact, I preached that, that confraternity retreat. Imagine, you wouldn't believe it, but it was a men's confraternity. There was a Monday night division, and a Tuesday night division, and a Wednesday night division. And there were 2,000 men in each division. And then on the Thursday night, you had the young men's division, and Friday you had the children. So the whole 5 weeks. And it was a huge event. A huge event. Anyway, it's just past history, belonging to an Ireland and a church that has, unfortunately, well, it has passed, and a lot of it needed to pass, and a lot of it, I think, was lost. It was sadly lost. So I went back. As I said, the last time I saw my mother was at the North Wall. I was going back by myself. I was bringing tea chests of typewriters and things for the mission, and getting them through the customs in Bombay. I was the only priest on board. It was an anchor line boat, Scottish boat. I went to Liverpool. I went from Liverpool to see my sister, who was a nun down in a place called Corby, and came back and got on the boat, and we headed off 3 weeks. So every Sunday I said Mass at 5 o'clock in the morning for the crew. They were mostly Filipinos, and then I said it for the passengers at I suppose later on in the morning. Anyway, that was the story. So I got back to Bombay. A big man. He was a brother, one of our brothers from Limerick, John Cantillon. He played rugby with Gary Owen. He was there to receive me, and this big white man, and the Indian, they were very the officials were there looking papers to get all this through. I think I had about 5 or 6 chests full of stuff, all stuff that would be useful for the missions, and you could see him like pleading with them, and they were amazed. It wasn't long after the time when the British Raj were there, and people were sort of kowtowing to the British, and I suppose the Irish too were part of it. But to have this man pleading with him, they let it through. On condition, one of the things was, I bought a few bottles of whiskey, that I could give a bottle of whiskey, and more important, that I could get their son into the school, the Catholic school in Chembur, in our parish. In India, I don't know what it's like today, but then, Hindus and Muslims, especially those who had money and wanted a good education for their children, and the same was true of their daughters and the nuns, they'd have given their right hand to get a son or a daughter into a Catholic school. The Christian brothers were highly regarded. In fact, I often thought the only place where the Christian brothers haven't been appreciated is in Ireland. They're all a totally Indian group at the moment. In fact, their overall superior general a few years ago, a man called Pinto, great man, he was Indian. So that's the way, there's a whole sort of history there. So when I came back in 1969, just again for a visit, I brought 2 little handbags with me, left all my stuff in India. It turned out that I was the only one from India back, and we were having what's called a provincial chapter, wrong and so on. So, as it turned out, I ended up at the end of that chapter not going back to India, but being appointed a rector of a big complex we have in Limerick, a school, a monastery, a church, and a mission group. Here I was, a young man, 36, 37, raw to Ireland, and thrown into this complete. So it turned out to be quite a strain. I was there for 6 years, and during the second time, I really was breaking down because it's burning the candle at both ends, trying to meet all, and not too sure what I was doing. I mean, people that think I did a great job and I started something new. Well, the fact is, I was living from day to day, what did we say, skating along the seat of my pants, barely holding on with my fingernails, and that's bound to take its toll. And it did take its toll eventually, because about 1980, I collapsed. I got a breakdown, and that's another story. So we'll come back to that later on.
So, Father Stan, so in total you spent about 14 years, did you, in India?
I spent, yes, 14 years, from February of 1955 until about maybe June 1969. Would that be right? Yeah, 14 years.
14 years. And then you come back, you were thrown in at the deep end in Limerick.
Absolutely, yeah. I was really thrown in at the deep end.
Can you tell us a little bit about that, Father Stan?
Well, in the community, at the time, there were about 45 members of the community. All the communities are very small now. They've diminished and gone down to, 10 or 12. But you had a cohort of older people, who had beaten the heat and toil of the day and had done their work. But they would be very strong traditionalists. And here was this young whippersnapper coming in from the missions that they didn't know and what kind of a person he was. So, initially I'd say they were very suspicious of me. Living with that isn't ever easy. And then I had a group, say, my own age, and one or two who had been in India with me. That was tremendous because we knew each other pretty well. So we were able to get going as regards making new attempts because life was changing, society was changing, culture was changing, Ireland was changing, the church was changing, and trying to cope with that was not at all easy. We also had a school, a boys' school, which used to be our juniorate, a feeder into the Redemptorist Seminary, but that had transformed or transmuted into being a boys' school, and they're very popular, and a lot of boys were coming there. So we had a staff in that. They were all Redemptorists at the time. I don't think there was any lay teacher. Now it's all run. The principal is lay, and all the teachers are lay, and there are about 500 in that school now. But anyway, that's so. It was very hard work. We started new things, new missions, going into parishes and setting up little groups and meeting people at night, and they were giving out all sorts of criticisms. What's a local parish priest? So the parish priest didn't like us coming into the parishes at all because of that, naturally. But the people had never got a chance before to give expression to what they felt and what they wanted. But it wasn't a wholesome. It was okay. It was okay. It was a beginning, but like many beginnings, needed to be refined and to be streamlined and to be more focused and to be more sensitive to all the different. You see, I was young. I was full of enthusiasm, full of new ideas. They used to talk about the young Turks. I was a young Turk, and so there were a few that were with me. So one of my regrets would be that I'm old now myself, and I can realize that others have great energy, and we're a bit in the way. We're a bit sort of not in tune with new developments. So maybe I was not, and I wasn't sensitive to those old men. I look back on them now, great men, great characters, given totally 50, 60, 70 years of their lives, to the gospel and to the preaching of it as they understood it. And so I would regret that. I would regret that, really. But otherwise, they were great years. There was great But I say my health took a battering, and I was, what should I say, I didn't give up, even though, see, I lost my sleep, and I was beginning to suffer from horrific panic attacks, especially appearing in public. I was terrified. I mean, it was irrational when you get these panic attacks, appearing in public. I mean, preaching and I was holding on for dear life, the same trying to get through Mass. I know towards the end of my time in Limerick, I used to take the earliest Mass possible where the fewest people would be attending. And I remember once at the end of the Mass sitting down after giving out Holy Communion, and I was saying to myself, my God, how will I get from here back to the altar without collapsing? I never did. You see, I had this sort of irrational panic that I was going to fall out in my face, that there was going to be an awful fuss, and I'd be carted off to the hospital or to the morgue, because your heart is belting and your hands are sweating, you're getting weak. If you don't experience it, it's very hard to describe it. So even with that, I carried on, and for the next 3 years I was part of the provincial council. You know, I was the one making the decisions about all the problems. Because again, people had this idea that I was a wonderful person and that I was very talented and I had great gifts and so on. But I knew I hadn't. You see, I knew that I was like I often compared it to a scaffolding around a building that's not tightly knit together and it's shaky and ready to collapse. And that was me. So I went on for that 3 years. And then came back again to a retreat house, and it was during that, and I was very busy, like all this time I was preaching retreats and called for seminars and workshops and all that kind of thing. So once I did a wedding of a cousin up in Bettystown, Julianstown, County Meath. Terrified, of course, but I got through it somehow. And that night I couldn't sleep all the night long. And I know that about, I suppose the morning maybe, I might have slept for 20 minutes, but I woke up crying, absolutely shattered and bawling, crying, couldn't stop. So all the pain and all the suffering that was in there, you know, repressed. It all came tumbling out. It was a relief to sort of say, look, I'm in trouble. I've helped a lot of people, but I know I need help myself. So I was in hospital for a while. You know, it took me a while to recover. Anyway, that's another story. I'm going on without intervening to say anything else. Like, do you want to...
No, you're fine. Yeah. Can I just ask, when you hit the wall that time in your darkest days, what actually got you through? I know you would have really a very strong faith, but do you have to trick your mind? You know?
You're very vulnerable when you're in that state, and you reach out. Of course, for medical care. And you almost put yourself totally in the hands of the doctor. And the doctor prescribes as best he can. He prescribed tranquilizers. And there came a point like, this all started in India, by the way. You know, the beginnings of it were there. And I thought that I just needed a bit of a break, or I just needed a good tonic, or, you know, a little time off, and I'd be grand. But it wasn't going away. So in India, the doctor prescribed Valium, which I thought was great initially, but then you needed more and more of it. And then I could hardly go out without having it in my pocket, and I knew exactly how many would be left. So that I was actually, I suppose, almost addicted. So that was one thing. That sort of got me through the things like I had to do family funerals, I had to do family weddings, and I mean, I wasn't enjoying anything. It was all an awful strain and stress, and all the time I was uptight, and as you say, I'd hit the wall. So the best thing I ever did was when I threw in the towel. When I said, look, I'm sick and I'm terrified and I can't go on. And of course I met with the greatest sympathy in my community. I mean, they couldn't have been nicer to me. The same in my family. Although my brother, who is now in a nursing home, is just older than myself, he came to see me when I was in hospital, and I was telling him what I was like. He says, don't be telling that to anybody. In other words, that didn't happen in the Mellett family. The Melletts were tough people and they didn't break down. But anyway, this Mellett did. And after that, I suppose it was at giving a retreat again. Like I kept going, I was keeping going and somehow, but I'd sit when I couldn't stand. I'd have some excuse, either I had a bad back, and I'd sit like this, and I was quite comfortable because I had something to hold on to. And around this time, they took away the altar rails from the churches. And that was a nightmare because here I was, you know, giving out Holy Communion and terrified. Before, when you had an altar rails in front of you, between yourself and the faithful coming up for communion, you had something to hold. Here I was out in mid-air, and you know, and even to this day, I may be shaky on that point. But then, giving a retreat, a nun who ran an alcoholic thing called Ashiree down in County Tipperary, she spotted that I was covering up because she was a shrewd woman, and I'm a good friend of hers even to this day. And she said, what's wrong with you? And of course I said, there's nothing wrong with me. Oh, she said, there is. And then she said, what you need is to go to Grow. Grow was something totally new to me. And so she told me about it, and she said there's a meeting in Limerick, and I was in Limerick at the time. So I said, you go to Grow. So I, psyched myself up, and I went along to the social service centre where the meeting was being held. It's like AA, it's a 12-step program. It's just like Alcoholics Anonymous. And I asked at the reception, where's, in a whisper of course, in case anybody would recognise me, a priest, and a well-known priest, going to Grow, getting a nervous breakdown. So I whispered, I said, where's the Grow meeting tonight? Oh, she said, they've changed the night. It isn't on at all tonight, it is on Thursday. The relief was enormous. It took me 2 months to get my courage back to go back again. And it was one of the greatest gifts. As I say, my community was very sympathetic, very helpful. My family was the same. But I suppose the greatest help that I got to sort of come to terms with this, I suppose, psychiatric situation that I was in was Grow. And it took me a while. There's no magic fix, there's no magic blessing. It just takes time. And one here in Ballyfermot, here in this building.
Yes. And just talking about that, the Grow that's here, Father Stan, I know you chaired them meetings. Is there someone to take them over when you leave?
Well, first of all, I'm not in charge of the meeting. I'm a member of the meeting. Okay. I'm a member of Grow. And nobody is in charge of the meeting. Anybody can be called upon to lead the meeting that night.
Okay.
I am the organizer, which means I'm supposed to get the room ready for the people when they come, have ready a cup of tea, a little biscuit or something at the end of the meeting, because there's a social dimension to Grow. But why did it start, or how did it start? There was a meeting in Grow, in Ballyfermot, a Grow meeting, long before I came, way back. And I remember at times meeting some of those people, and they were marvellous people. And it used to meet down in the resource centre. But it had folded for some reason, like meetings come and go. So it was defunct when I came. But there was one called Celia Bullard. Celia had been in that old group And she came to me and she said, look, we'll have to start that grow book again. And Celia is now retired, she's over 90. She's down in, is it Marymount or Mary? Marymount, she's there. And I went to visit her every month because, well, I haven't now because of the COVID for the last 9 months. But Celia was the one responsible. So Celia and myself, we started talking about it and announcing in the church and so on. And we had, in this very room, we had a sort of an information night telling people what it was about. Some people came and they thought they were going to be prayed over. So they sort of didn't get the... So some of those never came back. So we started with, I suppose, 2 or 3. It was very small at the beginning, but then it began to grow. No matter how bad your physical, emotional, sexual or spiritual condition, you are still a human being loved by God, a connecting link with other people, and you have your place and your purpose in this world that nobody else can do. So, I mean, that's lovely to say, and it's a very true statement, but to get it into my heart and to get it into the hearts of people who are broken, that's... So one of the things about Grow is a lot of time, a lot of patience.
Susanne, could you tell me, when you got the call to come to Ballyfermot, had you heard anything about the parish of the Assumption, or had you...
The best way to answer that question is when I told my older sister, the one that's going to be shortly 94 years of age, when she heard that I was coming to Ballyfermot, she said to me, will you be safe there? So she thought it was a sort of a jungle. Had I heard anything, we were already, the Redemptorists were already in Cherry Orchard. And I heard a lot about them and about the people. And those, my confreres, my colleagues who were in Cherry Orchard, had a very good experience. So in fact I made it known that if there was a vacancy in Ballyfermot, I was open to be appointed. So it was a very happy day on, I think, June of 2012 when I came to Ballyfermot. And very soon, you know, if I wanted to say it, I'll say it like this. I'm leaving now. And I'll say it's hard to say farewell to a people and a place I love so well. Leaving now and leaving here, I shed a tear for all the things I hold so dear. So that says it all. It's just a sort of a verse that says that it has been a marvelous time. It has been a years of great blessing, You know, that the abundance of people and friendships and ministry, it has been, and the environment. I mean, one of the things I'm going to miss enormously are the walks. I can go down to Markievicz Park, I can go up to California Hills, Glenallen Park, down to the Memorial Park, you know, and they're just at the doorstep. So in that sense, even the beautiful environs of the place, and everything is here. You can, anything, the shops are up there, and you can get everything you want in it. But actually, it's the people. Simple, straightforward, honest, and totally with you. Like all they need is the kindness and the gentleness that we can give them, and so that is why I say I'll be leaving with a heavy heart. I'll be leaving with a heavy heart. I would have stayed longer, and I was prepared to stay longer, but then because of the worries the superiors have about our health, so that is my final word, and I would love to say that I'll cherish very, very happy memories of the people, the friends I met, the work we were able to do. But I'd like to say that each one of us, we're just a channel. Like my life and your life, it's not about you or it's not about me. It's about me in God's purpose, in God's plan. In other words, God wants me, or put me into this world, put you into this world, in whatever station you're in, to promote a better world for justice and for peace and for gentleness and for kindness and love. So I'm just a challenge, very conscious of that I'm just, and I'm privileged, and God trusts me and trusts you to do that, that we're an instrument of his peace, as the song says. So, as I say again, it's hard to say farewell to the people and the place I love so well. As I leave, and leave here, I shed a tear for the many things that I hold so dear. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Stan. And on behalf of the Ballyfermot heritage, and especially the Ballyfermot people, everybody who has crossed your path during your time here, I'd like to thank you for your empathy and compassion that you've showed, your kindness to people, and most of all, your honesty. And may I just say that you'll always, always be thought of with great love, and there's always a welcome on the mat for you here, so thank you very much. And Father Seamus has big shoes to fill when he comes here to Ballyfermot.
Yes, well, we wish him well. Father Adrian and Father Seamus, David, I really wish them well, and they're blessed to be in such a garden, such a place in which to give expression to the best that's in them.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.